At 9:12 in the morning of April 16, 1947, a ship called the Grandcamp disappeared. Not sank. Disappeared. Vaporized in a fraction of a second, along with the dock, the warehouse beside it, the Monsanto chemical plant, and every single member of the Texas City Volunteer Fire Department who had come to fight the fire on board. The explosion was heard 150 miles away. It threw a 15-foot wall of water across the harbor. It launched a 2-ton anchor through the air and embedded it in the ground over a mile from the port. 581 people were killed. Thousands more were injured. And the fire that started it all, the small, smoldering fire in the cargo hold of the Grandcamp, had been burning for over an hour before the ship exploded. 72 minutes. That is how long the people of Texas City had to stop what was coming. And at every single point in those 72 minutes, someone made the wrong call. Think about the last time you trusted that someone above you had thought through the risks. The engineer who approved the building, the regulator who signed off on the cargo, the captain who decided he knew better than the manual. We hand that trust over every single day without thinking about it, because the system is supposed to catch what individuals miss. Texas City in 1947 is the story of what happens when every layer of that system fails at the same moment. Not through malice, not through sabotage, but through a chain of small, confident, completely ordinary decisions made by people who had no idea they were lighting a fuse. This is what those 72 minutes looked like from the inside. April 16, 1947 began the way most spring mornings did along the Gulf Coast of Texas. Clear sky, a light north wind coming off Galveston Bay, the smell of salt and petroleum that locals had long stopped noticing. Texas City was a boomtown, population 16,000, built around its port. 4 oil refineries, a styrene plant, 2 aviation gasoline facilities, grain elevators, warehouses. The kind of industrial density that made the town prosperous and kept the docks busy around the clock. The war had ended less than 2 years earlier, and the economy was moving fast. Faster, perhaps, than the regulations that were supposed to govern it. Moored at Pier O that morning was the Grandcamp, a French-registered Liberty ship, one of thousands of mass-produced cargo vessels built during the war. She had arrived in port on April 11th and spent the previous 2 days loading a consignment of ammonium nitrate fertilizer bound for post-war France. 2,300 tons of it, packed in 100-pound paper bags, stacked in the hold alongside sisal twine, peanuts, drilling equipment, tobacco, and a small quantity of small arms ammunition. Loading had been interrupted by rain the previous evening. On the morning of the 16th, the last 600 tons were due to go in before the Grandcamp sailed. What almost nobody in Texas City knew, and what the regulations of the time did not require anyone to clearly communicate, was that ammonium nitrate is not simply fertilizer. During the war, the same chemical compound had been a primary component of military explosives. The Army's Cornhusker Ordnance Plant in Nebraska had simply converted its production line from munitions to agricultural product when the war ended, rebagged the material, and begun shipping it through civilian ports under a classification that carried almost none of the safety requirements it had carried 12 months earlier. The no smoking signs were still posted around the docks from wartime protocol. By the spring of 1947, almost no one paid them any attention. At 8 o'clock that morning, longshoremen climbed into Hold 4 of the Grandcamp to resume loading. Nobody on that pier had any reason to think the day would end differently from any other. That was the first problem. Sometime just before 8 o'clock, one of the longshoremen in Hold 4 smelled something. A thin plume of smoke was rising between the cargo and the hull, 7 or 8 layers of bags down into the hold. Nobody had seen it start. The most commonly cited cause, documented in the Coast Guard's own investigation, was a carelessly discarded cigarette, dropped into the hold during loading the previous day, and smoldering overnight inside the packed paper bags. Nobody could be certain. What was certain was that by the time anyone noticed the smoke, the fire had already been burning for hours. The men tried a gallon jug of drinking water first. Then 2 fire extinguishers. Neither made any difference. A fire hose was lowered into the hold, but the water was never turned on. At this point, the gang foreman and the superintendent of stevedores were standing at the edge of the hold discussing what to do next. And that was the moment the captain of the Grandcamp appeared on deck and gave the order that would echo through the rest of the morning. He told them not to use water. He did not want the cargo ruined. By the logic of his position, it was a reasonable commercial decision. The ammonium nitrate was valuable cargo destined for food-starved post-war France. Water damage would ruin it. What he either did not know, or chose not to weigh against the cost of the cargo, was that ammonium nitrate does not need oxygen from the air to burn. It carries its own oxidizer within its own chemical structure. Standard approaches to fighting an ammonium nitrate fire are not just ineffective. They can make things worse. His solution was to seal all the hatches and pump steam into the hold to smother the fire. It was the kind of decision that makes sense only if you do not understand what you are dealing with. And in April of 1947, very few people in a civilian port did. The steam did not smother the fire. It began converting the ammonium nitrate into nitrous oxide, a volatile gas that fed the heat already building in the sealed hold. By 8:30, the longshoremen had been ordered off the ship. The hatch covers were closed. The Grandcamp was now, in effect, a sealed pressure vessel with a fire inside it. At approximately 8:30, the pressure building in Hold 4 blew the hatch covers off. A thick column of smoke erupted into the morning sky. Not gray, not black, but an unusual reddish-orange, almost peach in the sunlight. Survivors later described it as beautiful. One longshoreman said it looked like golden smoke in the morning light. A schoolgirl watching from a window said it reminded her of a sunset. The color came from nitrogen dioxide being produced by the heating ammonium nitrate, a detail that any chemist would have recognized immediately as a serious warning sign. There were no chemists on the dock. What the color of the smoke did do was attract attention. Hundreds of people began drifting toward the waterfront. Workers from the nearby Monsanto chemical plant came to watch. Dock employees, curious passers-by, children on their way to school. The scene had the quality of a spectacle rather than an emergency. Something worth seeing, not something to run from. Nobody cleared the area. Nobody told the crowd to move back. There was no evacuation protocol in place at the port of Texas City because no one had ever written one. At roughly the same time, the call went out to the Texas City Volunteer Fire Department. 27 of its 28 members answered. Chief Henry Baumgartner led 4 trucks down to the dock, where his men set up hoses along the pier and began directing water into the hold. The smoke was thick, and the heat coming off the deck was intense enough to vaporize the water before it reached the fire. But the firefighters held their positions. They had come to fight a fire, and they were fighting it. If any of them understood what was in that hold, the record does not show it. In 1947, there was no hazardous materials training in the United States Fire Service. The concept did not yet exist. At 9 o'clock, open flames erupted from the hatch of the Grandcamp. The smoke turned darker. The crowd at the head of the pier had grown to several hundred people. The firefighters held their positions. 12 minutes later, the Grandcamp ceased to exist. The explosion happened in a fraction of a second. Survivors said there was no warning sound, no final escalation. One moment the ship was there, and the next it was not. The blast was one of the largest non-nuclear explosions in recorded history. The concussion was felt in Galveston, 10 miles away, where it shattered plate glass windows. It was heard in Port Arthur, 150 miles to the east. A 15-foot tidal wave surged across the harbor. The Grandcamp's 2-ton anchor was found embedded in the ground more than 1.5 miles from the port. Steel fragments, ship components, and burning debris rained down across the city. The Monsanto chemical plant, 300 feet from the dock, was destroyed instantly, killing hundreds of workers inside. Every single firefighter on the pier was killed. 27 men. The only member of the department who survived was the one who had not answered the call that morning. The spectators standing at the head of the pier, the hundreds of people who had walked down to watch the beautiful orange smoke, were killed where they stood. School windows 6,000 feet away were blown in by the concussion, injuring children at their desks with flying glass. The high school gymnasium was converted into a morgue before noon. The town's morgues could not cope with the number of bodies. Many victims were unidentifiable. Families waited in agony for news that often never came. But the disaster was not over. 600 feet from where the Grandcamp had stood, a second ship, the SS High Flyer, was moored at the same dock. It was also loaded with ammonium nitrate, approximately 1,000 tons of it, along with a cargo of sulfur. The force of the first explosion had torn the High Flyer from its moorings. It was damaged, on fire, and drifting. In the chaos of the afternoon, with the city burning, the morgues overflowing, and the entire fire department gone, the High Flyer sat unattended at the dock, burning. Rescue workers arrived from across Texas through the afternoon and into the evening. Survivors were pulled from rubble. Families searched for the missing. At 11 o'clock that night, volunteers finally reached the High Flyer and understood what they were looking at. They called for tugboats from Galveston to pull the burning ship out to sea before it could do what everyone now feared it would do. The tugs arrived just after midnight. They were still trying to get the High Flyer clear when, at 1:10 in the morning of April 17th, it exploded. The second explosion was in many ways more violent than the first. It sank the adjacent ship SS Wilson B. Keene, caused further fires across the already devastated port, and killed more of the rescue workers who had come through the night to help. By the time the fires were fully extinguished, the damage to Texas City was almost incomprehensible. 581 confirmed dead, including 113 people of whom no physical trace was ever found. An additional unknown number of travelers, undocumented workers, and transient laborers were never officially counted. More than 3,500 people were injured. Roughly 1,000 homes and businesses were damaged or destroyed. Total property loss exceeded $100 million in 1947 terms. In the weeks that followed, investigators began asking the question that the morning of April 16th had made unavoidable. How does 2,300 tons of ammonium nitrate end up sitting in an unprotected civilian port with no evacuation plan, no hazmat protocol, no chemist on site, no procedure for a cargo fire, and a fire department that had never been told what it was dealing with? The answer, documented in the Coast Guard's own Board of Inquiry and later in Hugh Stevens's authoritative 1997 study, published by the University of Texas Press, was not a single failure. It was a cascade. The Army had reclassified the material without updating the safety requirements. The Coast Guard had regulations for dangerous cargo that it was not enforcing. The port had no emergency plan. The ship's captain had made a decision that prioritized cargo value over basic fire protocol. And the culture of post-war America, confident in its chemicals, certain that science had made the world safer, moving fast and not looking back, had created an environment in which nobody thought to ask the obvious question until it was too late. 8,485 survivors and family members filed suit against the United States government in the first class action lawsuit ever brought under the Federal Tort Claims Act of 1946. The case reached the Supreme Court in 1953. The government won. The court ruled that the United States could not be held liable for the regulatory failures that had allowed the disaster to happen. Congress eventually passed a special act in 1955, settling all remaining claims for a total of $16.5 million, an average of less than $2,000 per plaintiff. The families of 27 volunteer firefighters who had answered a call they did not fully understand received their share along with everyone else. In Texas City today, a memorial cemetery sits on the northern edge of town. 63 caskets are buried there in neat rows, the unidentified dead, each in a numbered grave, each recorded so that new evidence might one day connect a name to a number. The marble angel at the center of the cemetery looks downward, her fingers releasing a marble flower. The base is inscribed simply, Texas City Volunteer Firemen. The men who arrived at the dock that morning with 4 trucks and 27 sets of hands and no knowledge of what was burning in that hold, and who were gone by 9:13.